This is part 2 of my 2-part series on queerness in professional wrestling. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you go back and have a watch to get a brief idea of how far professional wrestling has come. Today, we're going to talk about how pro wrestling today is a much more inclusive, accepting space than it was years ago, and many of the wrestlers who made this possible. Looking back, professional wrestling only ever portrayed queerness to make a wrestler into a villain, a freak, or a joke. Despite the sport being based around half-naked, at most, men rolling around the ring with each other, getting in each other's faces, and swearing lifelong obsession with each other, pro wrestling had managed to distance itself from queerness by making it a joke. Homophobia and hypermasculinity, along with the fetishization of female homosexuality, were the norm, both to ensure that no one mistook this for being queer, and to reflect attitudes towards the community at the time. Nowadays, however, we've come a long, long way. Thanks to queer community activists risking their lives, fighting for our rights, the attitude towards queerness has changed, opening the door for queer wrestlers and queer storylines in a once closed-off medium. So let's take a look at some actual queer icons in professional wrestling today. This will not be an exhaustive list, so please feel free to leave the name of your favorite queer wrestler in the comments below. Growing up, it was incomprehensible to me that there would be an openly gay wrestler that nearly every independent wrestling fan had at least heard of. Today, however, that's exactly the case with Effie. Effie debuted in 2014. However, because his first few years were spent wrestling as an openly gay man in Georgia, he didn't immediately gain momentum. Effie has stated that his sexuality has cost him several bookings. However, in the first few years of his career, he used the fact that he was a gay man in a very deeply red Republican state to help get some productive heat to his character. Making the most of his situation and turning homophobia on its head, Effie continued racking up matches, refusing to dampen the open sexuality of himself or his in-ring persona. Effie eventually rose to fame around 2019 after a death match with Nick Cage, of all people, landed him with a regular spot in Game Changer Wrestling, and the eyes of many fans started to turn towards him. Today, Effie has made a name for himself as a gay icon in professional wrestling. Effie describes his in-ring persona as a turned-up version of himself. He often plays mind games with his opponents, being flirty, cute, and fun before landing a devastating DDT. He personifies the proud gay man, but he is also so much more than that. Effie is a gay man who openly acknowledges and plays on the inherent queerness of professional wrestling in a way that celebrates it, weaponizes it, and makes audience step back for a moment and go, wait, this is kind of gay. And they're right. It is gay. It's professional wrestling. There is no mocking of the queer community when it comes to Effie. He isn't making himself into some sort of a freak or a joke. Instead, he's a well-respected indie wrestler who's held 11 titles over his past 10 years of wrestling over several different promotions. Unlike the Goldust character, Effie's persona is real, honest, and strong. He isn't making a joke out of himself or anyone else. He just isn't shying away from emphasizing the intimacy of wrestling. Some important queer milestones in Effie's career include a match with Jon Moxley at GCW Homecoming 2022, wherein Effie seemed to have bitten off a bit more than he could chew. Instead of shying away from Effie's advances like most of his opponents, Jon Moxley countered Effie's offense by grabbing him by the head and kissing him pretty deeply for a not insignificant amount of time. The backlash this moment got almost matched the praise, as the queer community loved seeing Effie get his freak matched. Another huge milestone, not just in Effie's career, but in the queer wrestling community as a whole, was the creation of Effie's Big Gay Brunch. This is an event organized by Effie himself, which first took place in October of 2020, showcasing LGBTQ plus wrestlers and allies. This event was huge for the queer wrestling community, as it not only turned eyes towards a queer-centric wrestling show, but also created a space for queer wrestlers to show their talents. Having an event like this was huge for the queer community, proving that not only are there queer wrestlers, but that there are talented, overlooked, proud queer wrestlers who have carved their own place out in the modern-day landscape of professional wrestling. A 10-year veteran in the sport, Effie is widely known as an influential queer icon who keeps giving back to his community in order to prove that pro wrestling is for everyone. So, we'll talk about WWE for a moment here. I want to give a quick disclaimer. Quick, because I basically dug into WWE's homophobic past in the last video for nearly an hour straight. WWE is not really seen as a queer-friendly product. While several of the superstars I'm about to mention are openly part of the queer community, this is mostly kept off-air and out of the ring. Many assume this is to keep WWE sponsor-friendly, meaning they team with a couple pro-LGBT groups, but their actual televised product is staunchly heterosexual. Now, some people may want to point to a 2019 storyline wherein Liv Morgan and Lana were implied to be forming a romance. This storyline, however, was more so used for a shock factor, reminiscent of previous problematic storylines wherein female homosexuality was fetishized. This storyline, which was short-lived, doesn't earn a place in this video aside from this disclaimer. WWE, according to their track record, does not see storylines as profitable, sponsor-friendly, or serious. However, there are several out and proud wrestlers who either previously wrestled for or currently wrestle for WWE, and I would be remiss to leave them out simply because the WWE keeps queer content off of its product. The very first wrestler I can remember learning was gay was Darren Young, who came out in 2013 while actively wrestling for WWE. This was a huge deal at the time, because this made Darren Young the first openly gay wrestler to be currently competing in WWE. Previously, wrestlers such as Pat Patterson and Chris Kanyon had come out after they had either left WWE or were no longer part of the active roster. Darren Young was still appearing on TV at this time, and in an era where gay marriage was not yet legal in the United States, this took an immense amount of courage. WWE swiftly came out with a statement of support for Young, along with several of his fellow wrestlers. Nowadays, Young is signed with the National Wrestling Alliance and is outspoken about his anti-bullying stance and LGBT rights. Other notable wrestlers who are openly gay and who are currently signed with WWE as of 2024 are Shayna Baszler, a former UFC fighter trained by Josh Barnett, now a powerhouse in WWE, who has come out as having, quote, dated someone who is female. She, however, doesn't want to label herself as anything black and white. Doudrop, also known as Piper Niven, is another WWE wrestler who has come out as bisexual on her social media. Another, Sonya Deville, is considered to be the first openly gay woman to be actively wrestling for WWE. When asked about her sexuality, Deville explained that she wants to be a voice for her community and help other young women struggling with their own sexuality. Deville has become a female figurehead for young queer women with her strong in-ring presence and an unflinching pride in her sexuality. All Elite Wrestling has made a name for itself as where the best wrestle. More so than that, however, AEW is a place where non-conventional wrestlers are placed on grand stages to prove that professional wrestling comes in all shapes, sizes, and sexualities. AEW has prided itself on making massive stars out of wrestlers who don't match the common mold of professional wrestling. This includes openly accepting and celebrating their queer wrestlers, both outside of and inside of the ring. Now, before I give AEW too much credit, they do run into frequent issues where, despite the fact that they have deep, heartfelt queer storylines playing out in the ring, the company itself, namely the commentary team and interviewers, shies away from outright stating that certain same sex wrestlers are in love, have flourishing romances, etc. While there's a lot of work to be done there, AEW has given us some of the most moving modern day queer storylines in pro wrestling. One significant storyline is that between Toni Storm and Mariah May. Beginning in late 2023, Mariah May and Toni Storm began an epic storyline that immediately caught on with fans. At first, because Toni Storm's new timeless persona was absolute genius, executed with perfect storytelling, acting, and hilarious details, such as having her appear in black and white while everyone else was in full color, and her catchphrase, "Chin up, tits out, and watch for the shoe." Mariah May was introduced as a sort of lackey, but it became quickly evident that the two women were working towards something much deeper. The longer the two women worked together, the closer they became, and fans of AEW quickly caught on to a blossoming romance as the two women started to embrace bosoms, proclaim their love, and give each other passionate kisses in ring and in interviews. What struck fans about this storyline was that it was so far removed from what previous storylines hinting at romance between women had looked like. There was no hypersexualization, no predatory behavior on the side of one of the women. It was instead what appeared to be a mutual romance, full of passion and genuine feeling for the other women. While Toni's character is seen as a comedy character, and she was often over the top with her exclamations of love, it all still felt very genuine. As a testament to just how invested fans were in this storyline, when Mariah May wound up turning on Toni Storm after winning the Owen Hart Cup tournament, people were heartbroken. It was an uproar that immediately earned Toni incredible sympathy and Mariah May incredible heat, especially as we saw the two face off at All In 2024, where Toni Storm could not help but to look at Mariah with an absolutely genuine, heartbroken expression. As a side note, the women also included a third into their love story. Mina Shirakawa made a couple of appearances between the women, at first competing for Mariah's love with Toni, but inevitably being folded into a sort of polycule. Mina is significant in this storyline because she, unlike AEW commentary, was not afraid to outright state that Toni and Mariah were in love. This was not an intense friendship. It was love, pure and true, until Mariah's shocking betrayal. In addition to this queer storyline, AEW also lays claim to one of the most poignant moments in queer wrestling history. Anthony Bowens, who had been an out-and-proud gay man for much of his AEW career, stepped into the ring in June 2023 alongside his fellow tag team partner Max Caster and their manager/daddy, Billy Gunn. During their match against members of QTV, Harley Cameron attempted to distract Bowens by claiming he was into her. Bowens, making a joke of the moment, told Harley, "I don't know if you can see my gear, lady. I'm gay." There was a pause, and then huge, uproarious cheers from the live crowd. These cheers quickly became a chant. He's gay. I want you to take a moment and imagine this same chant taking place in the mid-2000s, the early 2000s, hell, the 90s. The connotation of such a chant would have been mocking, jeering. It would have been a crowd insulting a likely heterosexual wrestler. Shawn Michaels received a number of "he's gay" and "Shawn's gay" chants throughout his career, none of which being said with the same reverence that Anthony Bowens received. Now, place yourself in this moment, 2023, where thousands of fans are celebrating Anthony Bowens by exclaiming, happily, "he's gay." Can you imagine what that was like for me, a young queer trans man? To hear just how far pro wrestling has come, how much society has changed, how inclusive and accepting wrestling fans are nowadays. To have a gay man standing in the middle of the ring and not have his sexuality be demonized for a storyline. This moment meant everything to queer wrestling fans. Not only did it show us just how over Anthony Bowens was, but how drastically times have changed in professional wrestling. Now, I just mentioned that I'm trans, so let's take a moment to appreciate AEW's genderqueer wrestlers. Nyla Rose is a trans woman, former AEW Women's World Champion, and all-around powerhouse. She is representative not just of the trans community in professional wrestling, but of the Native American, Black, and lesbian communities. Nyla Rose proved throughout her career that transgender athletes have a place in pro wrestling, making history with every match and earning the accolade as the first transgender wrestler to sign with a major promotion. She has since risen up through adversity, both from online abuse and local sporting agencies. In 2024, the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission sent AEW a warning after Nyla wrestled a match in the state. The commission was upset that a trans woman had been put into competition against a, quote, biological woman, unquote, which was against OSAC rules. Nyla received immediate and overwhelming support from both AEW and former wrestlers, with hordes of fans condemning the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission for their transphobic policy and for threatening punitive action against AEW if they had Nyla wrestle again in their state against her fellow women. Nyla rose above this, however, and has continued to wrestle with AEW and put on incredible, show-stopping matches. She is a figure of strength, resilience, and pride, not just for myself, but for the entire trans community. Other genderqueer wrestlers include Abaddon, a badass zombie character who identifies as non-binary and uses they-them pronouns. While I wish Abaddon received more screen time, they are an incredible character and wrestler, and one of the very few non-binary pro wrestlers on the scene. Lastly, there's Sonny Kiss, who, yes, I know, is no longer signed with AEW and currently wrestles for Impact Wrestling, but who served several years under the AEW banner as a gender-fluid wrestler. Sonny Kiss is featured in Out in the Ring, a documentary discussing how the queer community has influenced and continues to influence professional wrestling today, as well as the experience of queer wrestlers throughout history. Sonny has served as an important figurehead in the pro wrestling trans community, having put on incredible matches against icons such as Kenny Omega and Matt Cardona. Perhaps one of the most important, well-known love stories in professional wrestling, The Golden Lovers, is a story far too long and far too complex for me to delve into in this video. They deserve a single dedicated documentary-length video detailing their relationship and the impact this story had on American and Japanese professional wrestling, queer history, and queer wrestling. I have left this story for last because I want to give it as much justice as is possible in an abridged video. For all the details I leave out, I apologize, and I direct you to the numerous videos on YouTube and timelines recorded on Tumblr. Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi are considered by many to be the greatest modern-day professional wrestlers. Combined, they have numerous accolades, including dozens of title runs and countless unforgettable in-ring moments. Both men were initially drawn towards each other because they saw that the other man viewed professional wrestling in a unique way, where anything was allowed. In other words, pro wrestling was an art form that could not be constrained and defined to specific rules. This led the two of them to do both traditional and non-traditional matches, constantly pushing the boundaries of what one would expect to see in a match. For Kenny Omega, this meant fighting children, drowning his opponents in a lake, leaping off a vending machine, fighting a sex doll. This is the greatest professional wrestler to ever do it, guys. And for Kota Ibushi, it meant fireworks. Lots and lots and lots of fireworks. Combining these two powerhouses of professional wrestling, the Golden Lovers were formed. Now, I'm leaving out a lot of history and some incredible matches, which I suggest you seek out on your own time. Every match these two put on is a clinic, and their storytelling is unmatched. What I want to focus on, however, is the queer storyline these two told in the face of adversity. The Golden Lovers was, for a long time, treated as something less than what it was. Despite their name, and the fact that Kenny and Kota often referred to each other with intimate romantic titles such as Ibutan, no one took them seriously as romantic partners. This comes in spite of their obvious chemistry both in and out of the ring, as many interviews have detailed Kota and Omega's ability to communicate despite a language barrier. Instead, they used their incredible in-ring ability and general personal chemistry to communicate. Many saw the two as, initially, sort of a joke when it came to their relationship. In 2009, when the Golden Lovers were already an established tag team, and during a match where the two were pitted against one another, a fellow wrestler jokingly pushed the two of them together so that they would accidentally kiss. What was meant as a gag turned into the two sharing a long, lingering kiss. You can see some audience members laughing, but this was anything but a joke. The Golden Lovers were, from the start, lovers, despite the constant censorship this pairing faced. This wouldn't be the first time they kissed. They shared a cute smooch after this match, and again later at another match when, once again, their opponent was pushing them together. Now, their connection was evident even without obvious romantic gestures. Kota Ibushi and Kenny Omega have interlaced their love into every wrestling match they have ever had. You can see in several matches where the two are pitted against one another how they hesitate to land devastating moves on the other. You can watch their facial expressions, see the way they communicate, see how they block out the rest of the world in favor of focusing on the other man, regardless of who else is in the ring or the size of the audience watching. Even in a period of time when Kenny and Kota had a falling out, the two of them could not help but to mention each other in interviews, or leave signs that the other person was constantly on their mind. Kenny and Kota would split up as the culmination of one of the most emotionally poignant storylines in Golden Lovers history. At this time, Kenny slowly began to show signs of jealousy at Kota Ibushi's talent and success, and this would begin to drive a wedge between the two. After a long series of betrayals, including an incredible match between the Golden Lovers and Kenny's longtime friends, the Young Bucks, it looked like the Golden Lovers would be over for good. This, however, was not to be. Again, for the sake of this video, I'm skipping over a lot of very important history. Years after Kenny and Kota's initial falling out and brief getting back together, Kenny Omega left Japan to return stateside to join AEW along with co-founders the Young Bucks. During this period of time, despite Kota Ibushi remaining in Japan and Kenny being an entire country away from him, we still received the occasional reminder that Kenny and Kota were constantly on each other's minds. Finally, after several hint drops, Kota Ibushi and Kenny Omega reunited at Blood and Guts in 2023 to fight alongside one another. You can tell from my heavily abridged retelling that this story is unbelievably layered, full of passion, and crafted by two men who loved this sport. More so than that, it was crafted by at least one wrestler, Kenny Omega, who has openly discussed his romantic interest in men and women in several interviews and on the YouTube series Being the Elite. Bisexual king shit. While this story is so obviously one between two wrestlers in love, it continues to be censored to this day. When Kota debuted at Blood and Guts, commentary made sure to call the two very close friends and brothers rather than the truth. They, or at least their in-ring characters, were lovers, perfect wrestling companions, two of the most talented men to ever step into the ring, finding a kinship in one another. So don't let modern-day censorship of this story by either AEW, DDT, or New Japan fool you. This is, and was, a love story. Perhaps the greatest queer love story ever told in pro wrestling. Modern-day professional wrestling has a plethora of queer icons. Looking back tells us just how far we've come. And while we still have a lot of work to do in terms of letting queer stories be called queer stories and showcasing more queer wrestlers in storylines and major wrestling promotions, we can also celebrate the inclusivity of today. Wrestlers like Kenny Omega, Sonya Deville, Pat Patterson, Nyla Rose, and Effie, and so many countless others who are living their lives as their true, authentic selves, reach an audience of young queer viewers who look up to them. I so sincerely wish that I had this kind of representation when I was growing up watching wrestling. To have queer and trans wrestlers on such massive stages today, with the exposure that they have on social media, means a new generation of queer wrestlers can step up and build upon the foundation set down for them. I hope you've enjoyed this two-part series. Who knows, maybe in the future I'll add on a third part, or delve even deeper into some of the wrestlers and storylines I mentioned here. Until then, feel free to leave some of your own queer wrestling icons in the comments below. And, as always, please remember to be respectful of each other.